Welcome back to Torah on the Go. Whether you are on your Peloton or you're walking your dog, stuck in traffic, or you are taking a break from work, we are glad that you joined us and you made the decision to study Torah a little bit with me, and here's Rabbi Feinstein.
Hi.
So we are now officially going to open the book of Exodus. We're going to open Sefer Shemot with you and start studying the first 7 psukim. So before we begin studying the actual words of Sefer Shemot, I want to just reflect on the name of Sefer Shemot. The Lebovitz Rabbi teaches if you can't study the actual parsha, just study the name of the parsha. The name tells you a lot. You can just use that one word or the phrase and reflect on what it is that means in your life, what it means for the Jewish people. Shemot does not mean Exodus. So I hate to break that to our audience, right? Shemot means names. And the parsha begins with a list of names of the children of Israel who descended to Egypt. That's a very different starting point than Exodus. Or what are the implications of calling the book names or calling the book Exodus?
Oh, that's great. That's a wonderful question. So in the Jewish tradition, a book of the Bible gets its name from the first significant word in the first line of the text, right? So that would mean if Moby Dick were named that way, it would be called the Book of Ishmael, right? So the first word of Genesis is Breshit. That's the name of the book. The second book, the one we're about to learn, Ve'elu Shemot B'nai Yisrael. Shemot means names. It's just the second word. It's completely arbitrary. The remarkable thing is how much those names, chosen arbitrarily, actually do reflect the essence of each book. Breshit, Genesis. Breshit means in the beginning. It's a book of beginnings, the beginning of the world, beginning of humanity, beginning of the Jewish people, and not just beginnings, but its foundations. It's the beginning of our faith. These are the presuppositions, the deep, deep assumptions of Jewish faith. The way we look at the world, the way we look at God, the way we look at good and evil. The second book, Shemot, which we're about to take on, just means names, because the first line is, these are the names of the children of Jacob who went down into Egypt, and there were these kids, and there were 70 altogether, and Joseph was already there. Except that book is a book of identity. It contains the 2 narratives, the 2 stories, which define us, the Exodus from Egypt and the Revelation at Mount Sinai. It is a book of our identity. The third book, quickly, is Vayikra. In English, it's Leviticus, which I always thought was the sequel to Spartacus. Leviticus, in Hebrew, it's Vayikra, God called to Moshe from the Ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting. And it really is that call. Here is devotion. Here is how we are to respond to the presence of God in our lives with acts of devotion. That's what Leviticus is about. The third book is Bamidbar, in the wilderness. And it really is a book of the wilderness. It's a book of the physical wilderness that we traverse to get to the promised land. More than that, it's a book of the social wilderness, the dark side of the human soul, the dark side of human society that Moses has to wrestle with in order to make us the chosen people. And finally, the last one is Devarim, which means words. And it really is, it's the last words of Moshe. And it's a book of the words that are given us to take into the world. So each of the books has a beautiful way of capturing what's really in the book. Shemot, Exodus. Exodus is the leaving of Egypt, but that's really the first of the 2 episodes. The second episode is the revelation at Sinai, which makes it worthwhile. I mean, why did we leave Egypt? We didn't just leave Egypt to get out of slavery. We left Egypt to become a certain kind of people. And that culminates in that moment at Mount Sinai when we meet God and we accept the covenant. That's why it's called Shemot.
So the book of Exodus is broken into basically 4 sections. There's the Egypt slavery Exodus section. There's the revelation at Sinai section, right? There's the building of the tabernacle section. And that section I would divide, I guess, into 2 different sections, which is the instructions of building the tabernacle and our great accomplishment of building it and setting out on the journey.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we understand that, and let's just make sure that everybody understands, Genesis and Exodus were not names of Jewish choosing.
No.
right? So Jewish choosing the Hebrew words Bereshit and Shemot are the names given by our tradition. And later, through the Greek Septuagint, and we can have a long conversation of where these names come from, but it's not from the Jewish people that the names Genesis and Exodus arrive. Exodus is the theme that's, when the book is studied, Exodus is the large theme that was given to it to name the book. But I think, based on what you had just said, if we gave it a Jewish English name, it wouldn't be names. I love the word identity, right? Because this is a book that if you read it in its totality, we're a people who yearn for freedom, who yearn to move on our journey, we yearn to be in relationship with God, and we also try our best to build community and institutions that actually facilitate all of those tasks. Yeah. So that's what really our identity is enwrapped in so many aspects of this book.
Right, and I want to highlight the word you just used, which is just wonderful. Move. This is a dynamic book. I mean, the narrative metaphor is a journey.
Right.
We're leaving a place and going to a place. We're moving. And the deep structure of this book is a book about aspiration. We are not what we are what we aspire to become. This is a book of becoming. What do we want to become? What does it mean to become God's people, a holy people? What does it mean to become a people? What does it mean to become a free people? This is a book that aspires, and I'm going to give a hint, we'll get to the end in some months, it's not going to resolve at the end. When we get to the end, you're going to feel like, wait, we're not done, which is actually the best way to end a movie. You were once a great producer, so you know how to do this. You don't end a movie with a grand climax. You end the movie with a to be continued tag, because this book is only going to introduce this dynamic that captures us. It's moving. It's a book about moving.
In a first in the entire Jewish tradition, I want to talk about the end of Exodus, when we get to the end of Exodus, as compare it to the end of Rocky. Okay, because no Rocky movie ever resolves either. And that's why the beginnings of all Rockies is actually the last scene of the previous movie. It's the other. So in the first ever, I'm going to compare Rocky and Moses, but you'll have to save that for the very end.
The prophet Sly Stallone.
I'll be.
Hey, Adrian.
Okay, so these are actually the verses, okay, of the first 7 verses of the book of Exodus, Sefer Shemot, right? Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael haba'im Mitzrayma. These are the names of the children of Israel that came toward Egypt, that came down to Egypt, okay? That's how the book begins. And then we get 5 verses of names, okay?
Right.
Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, all the names of the 70 people who came down, okay? And Midrash explains to us, well, this one had a family of this big, this, and they get to the 70. That seems to be, 70 is a good round number in rabbinics. Then verse 6, Vayamat Yosef v'chol echav v'chol hador hahu. And Joseph died, and all of his brothers died, and the entire generation died out.
Right.
Okay.
The end. That's the end of Genesis.
The end of Genesis. So the end of Genesis overlaps, just like I explained, the Rocky analogy, right? The beginning of this book is the end of the last book. They overlap. Even though we read about the end of that generation in the previous book, this book opens that same way.
Right.
Then verse 7, Uvnei Yisrael paru v'yishretzu v'yirbu v'ya'atzmu, right? And the children of Israel were fruitful and multiplied and grew and strengthened b'ma'od ma'od, very, very, very much.
Right.
Okay? V'tzimaleh ha'aretz otam, right? And we filled the earth. The children of Israel filled the earth. Now, what's fascinating about that beginning, and again, this is a carryover from the previous book, that is actually the promise that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob get. They receive from God that we will fill the earth. We will fill the earth. We will become like the stars. We'll become like the sand.
Yeah.
But nobody thought, when you're reading the book of Genesis, that promise, that covenant is going to be fulfilled in Egypt.
Right.
And I always feel like when I read these first 6 verses, it's always be careful what you ask for.
Right.
Because you might get it, right? And we got it at perhaps the worst time of our choosing.
Right. Yeah, well, let's just go back just a second. when I teach Bible to kids, I always teach them this principle that every word matters.
Yeah.
It's, because we had to schlep this on our backs for 2,000 years. So you got to imagine that every word is worth $1 million. The Torah only needed one word to say the Jewish people were fruitful, but it uses 4, right? Paru, veru, and then it's a b'ma'od me'od, like a whole lot.
Right.
And the words are reminiscent of the first chapters of Genesis, pru urvu.
That's right.
And then you get yishritzu, which is the word that early Genesis uses to describe the animals of the world filling up the world. I mean, you have this real sense of cosmic fecundity, right? Cosmic fruitfulness, an explosion of life of this people. And that's how we begin. In this, like, way more than you can imagine, because the people that we're about to meet in the next verse are not just a family of 70 people. I mean, a family of 70 people can get lost in Grand Central Station, or LAX. This is going to be a mighty people, which is going to, in some ways, threaten the king of Egypt. And that's the difference between the family that was so small, running away from Canaan because of famine, and the family that prospers and flourishes in the land of Egypt. That's the contrast. That's the beginning of the book.
And that 7th sentence to me always strikes me as such a warning about the diasporas that we create.
Oh, it's just
right. So
okay.
It's just like, to take a pause here. This is probably a reflection moment at the very end, but we left the land of Canaan to look for food and prosperity and security and safety, and we got it b'ma'od ba'od.
Yeah.
Right? You want it? We got it. And Egypt was fantastic for a long time.
Right.
And then suddenly it stopped being fantastic. This is the story of ma'od ma'od. This is the story of what happens when it stops being fantastic all of a sudden. What do we do then? And I think this is a to me, it's always intriguing that this is our origin story. Our origin story is what happens to the Jewish community or the Jewish people when we are someplace else. Right? Because you mentioned it last week or the week before. We're a people right now struggling to tell our story again and again and again in this world. Right? We are a people who, if we were only about a religion, if we were only a people that cared about religion per se, then our story would end in Exodus 20. We would receive the Torah, and that would be our religion. But it didn't, because we have to continue journeying back to home. And there is a tension from the very beginning of the book of Exodus. You left this place that you were promised. You came here looking for something. You got it. The first 7 sentences explain we everything we had hoped and dreamed occurred. Everyone was fertile. Everyone was prosperous. We grew mighty. Physically, yirbu. We were strengthened. V'yatzmu. We were strengthened. So, and now there's a problem.
Yeah. So we both talked about this on the holiday, and I think it's worth remembering. This is the pattern in Jewish history, as you said, right? There was famine when the temple was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. There was famine, and there was oppression in the land of Israel under the Romans. So we moved to Babylon. We moved to Iraq. And Vayatzmu, we became a great community on the banks of the Euphrates. Great. It's where the Talmud was written. And we prospered there. And then the government changed. And life became impossible there. And so we left. The next place we moved in the 10th, 11th century was Iberia. We became a great civilization in Iberia. And then the government changed. The Christian Reconquista came and made Jewish life in Iberia impossible. So we moved to Holland, and Holland became a great place. And then we moved to Eastern Europe in the 15th century, and that became a great place. I'm sure you had the same experience because with your grandparents who were so very close to you. We used to sit at the Seder table with my aunts and uncles who were all immigrants. And my brother happened to be a wonderful sort of interviewer. And he used to say, and Sarah, tell us the story of how you came. Bubby, tell us the story. And they would tell us a story that, there was once this marvelous Jewish civilization in Eastern Europe. And then my ancestors came in 1914. They got out before the real catastrophe. But they came because the pogroms made life impossible. This is the pattern over and over again of Jewish life. And the really interesting question right now for us, we both spoke about this on the holiday, is are we seeing the same pattern repeated here in America? I mean, is this really that moment of the American Jewish saga? Or is this just a temporary lull and we can continue? Is America different? Is America exceptional in the way that Jews find a place here? But this story would say, be very careful, because the more Peru, Yishritzu, Yatzmu, the stronger you are, the greater you are, the more you attract the attention of those who find you threatening. And that becomes the story over and over and over again, the cycle of Jewish history of diaspora.
You know, my grandfather, Simon Lebovitz, used to it always came out the same way. He would tell a story about how he had so many brothers and sisters. All of my grandparents came from giant families except for my mother's father. And they had nothing in the Carpathian Mountains. And he would talk about how he and his friends used to go out on Shabbos with a soccer ball made of socks and pillowcases. And whatever it is that they could get, they would tie it together into a ball. Right. And they would play, and he would explain. That story would always bring a smile to his face. He would say, it was such a happy childhood. Now, that happy childhood was juxtaposed against him saying that it was the worst place to live in the entire world. The story turns so quickly when you listen to him. So I feel like that's what this first preamble of Exodus, this beginning of connecting back to Genesis, this explaining in one sentence, life was actually very good for a long time. Life was good for a long time before, and I feel like people don't appreciate this enough, before the Haggadah begins, which is essentially the rest of the book of Exodus, is the Haggadah narrative. Before the Haggadah begins, we enjoyed a generation or two of Egyptian life that was wonderful. And all of the generations of the people mentioned did very well there. And now, what do you do with it when the whole story flips on a verse? Yeah. And that's what's about to happen to us. So we start with identity, and we start with a prehistory of Jewish life in Egypt. Yeah. And I would argue that's how we all start. Yeah. We all start with an identity. We all start with a prehistory of who we are when we tell our own story. Yeah,
and I think this is important, because I had the same experience with members of my family, and then there are many, many, many friends who were survivors. Right. And I would ask them, tell me this story. And they would start out by saying, it was wonderful to be in Germany in the 20s. Right. You know, my father owned a factory. My mother had beautiful clothes. We had art on the walls. And I said, well, then what happened? He said, then it changed. And it changed so quickly. Right? So my teacher, David Hartman, used to say, you have to understand that any place we live that isn't ours, he was a big Zionist. Yep. He said, any place that we're living that isn't ours always had a quality of tentativeness. Like we're 98% at home. Mm-hmm. But the 2%, he used to joke, he'd say, that's why we never take off our hats, and we have the same word for hello and goodbye. Because Jews are always ready to say, it's time to leave. You know, it's always a tentativeness, right? I'm like you, as American as can be, you know, raised in this country, speak its language, know its culture, participate fully, you know. And yet, I remember growing up feeling as a kid, and even as a grown-up, and now as a parent and a grandparent, you know, that 2% of maybe it's time to keep a suitcase near the door. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's time to take another look. Right. You know, this kind of tentativeness is what's hinted at here.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And what's fascinating is that you know, we're recording this before the election, before the World Series. A lot is coming up in the world, in the American world, that will carry with it great implications. Yeah. That will carry with it great implications for the way that the Jewish world understands itself, for the way that the American identity understands itself, for the way that our journey carries forward for the next few years. And what this book teaches in that 7th to 8th verse, that transition, is that decisions matter. Yeah, decisions matter.
And there's this deep instinct, you know, this deep instinct. One of the historians said that the problem with Jews is that they lost the instinct of watching out. I remember just a silly story. We took my kids when they were young. We went up to Sequoia National Park to do a camping trip. And as you drive up 99 or something, you get off at Visalia. And it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's a Safeway supermarket. We're going to stop and get some ice for the cooler and maybe get some orange juice and get a snack for the kids. And we're walking around. We're the only people in the Safeway supermarket in Visalia. And I'm shopping in one section, and the kids are running around the market, and I hear from clear across the market, "Hey, look, Dad, they have gefilte fish." And my first instinct was, shh, I don't know. Visalia, California. I've been living here my whole life, and I'm so comfortable here, and I feel safe here. And yet that little teeny instinct, like kid, don't tell Visalia Safeway people that we're here. Just don't be too visible. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is what this captures. That's what this story is.
That Safeway was about to sell its first jar of gefilte fish in its entire history. You ruined it.
I don't think we didn't buy it. I don't think we bought it.
It was a test. They put that jar out just as a test to see if there are any Jews that come through.
It's like a trap, like a roach moth. It's a Jew trap. You know?
That's right. That's right. That's very funny.
You know.
Oh gosh. All right. Well, we accomplished seven verses. We should be really proud of ourselves. We should be really proud of ourselves. I was once studying in Israel, and they told me that the real test is how long you can spend in the Talmud on one word.
Oh gosh!
And I thought to myself, my gosh, I'm never going to make it here.
No, there's actually Reb Mimi used to teach us this. There's actually a Hasidic tradition that when you daven, you do the Shemona Esrei, you do the Amidah prayer, which we do in about 3 minutes. You know. You're actually supposed to take 5 minutes a word. It'll take you three hours to finish the prayer, but you'll be transformed. You start with the word Baruch, blessed. What does it mean to be blessed? Who am I? Who is blessed? Atah Adonai. So we're doing okay.
Right. Six verses were flying. Seven verses were flying.
In 3 weeks, we did 6 verses.
That's right.
At this rate.
At this rate, it'll take us several years, but
get there.
We'll get there. We'll get there. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time studying Torah with us and Torah on the go. And we'll see you next week.
Take care.